Moscow, Idaho, sits deep in the rolling hills of the Palouse, a distinct geographic region characterized by sweeping agricultural fields. It is a place defined by its remote beauty and its status as a quintessential college town. The University of Idaho serves as the cultural and economic anchor of the community, swelling the local population with thousands of students each fall. Generations of families have sent their children to this campus, drawn by its rigorous academic programs, strong Greek life, and the profound sense of safety inherent in a close-knit, rural community. For decades, Moscow maintained a reputation as an idyllic haven where violent crime was an anomaly, a place where young adults could navigate the transition from adolescence to adulthood with a sense of security and freedom. In the autumn of 2022, the campus was vibrant, recovering from the isolation of previous years and buzzing with the typical rhythms of university life. Football games, sorority functions, and late-night study sessions filled the calendars of the student body. Among these thousands of students were 4 individuals whose lives were deeply intertwined through friendship, romance, and shared ambitions. Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin represented the heart of the University of Idaho Greek community. They were bright, ambitious, and deeply loved by their families and peers. Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves shared a bond that predated their college years. Growing up in northern Idaho, the two became inseparable in the 6th grade. Their families considered them adopted daughters of their respective households, a testament to a friendship that endured through middle school, high school, and eventually, their enrollment at the University of Idaho. Both young women were 21 years old and seniors, standing on the precipice of their postgraduate lives. Madison, known to her friends as Maddie, was a marketing major and a proud member of the Pi Beta Phi sorority. She possessed a gentle, nurturing demeanor and a strong work ethic. Alongside her academic commitments, she managed a job at a local Greek restaurant in downtown Moscow, balancing her responsibilities with a vibrant social life. Her friends described her as the steady, reliable center of their group, someone who offered unwavering support and a calming presence. Kaylee Goncalves was the extroverted counterpart to Madison's quiet strength. An Alpha Phi sorority member and a general studies major, Kaylee was known for her fierce loyalty, her sharp sense of humor, and her driven nature. She was a planner, always looking toward the next milestone. By the fall of 2022, Kaylee had already completed her graduation requirements early. She had purchased a new vehicle and secured a lucrative marketing job in Austin, Texas, set to begin the following year. Although she had recently moved out of the off-campus home she shared with her friends, she frequently returned to Moscow to visit, unable to sever the deep ties she had to the university and, most importantly, to Madison. Sharing the off-campus residence with Madison was 20-year-old Xana Kernodle, a junior majoring in marketing. Xana was also a member of Pi Beta Phi, and her infectious energy made her a beloved figure within the sorority and the broader campus community. Originally from Post Falls, Idaho, Xana was fiercely independent and known for her ability to light up any room she entered. She was an excellent student who took her academic career seriously, but she was equally committed to her friends. Xana possessed a unique ability to make everyone around her feel seen and valued, often organizing social gatherings and ensuring that no one felt left out. Xana's life in Moscow was deeply intertwined with that of her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin. Ethan, a 20-year-old freshman from Conway, Washington, was part of a set of triplets. He shared a remarkably close relationship with his brother and sister, both of whom also attended the University of Idaho. Ethan was majoring in recreation, sport, and tourism management, with dreams of a career in the sports industry. He was a member of the Sigma Chi fraternity, which was located just a short walk from the girls' off-campus house. Standing 6 feet 4 inches tall, Ethan was a formidable presence, but his friends and family knew him as a gentle, easygoing young man with a constant smile. He was deeply devoted to Xana, and the two were rarely seen apart. Their relationship was characterized by mutual support and shared laughter, a partnership that brought joy to everyone in their circle. Ethan was a constant fixture at the girls' residence, blending seamlessly into the lively dynamic of the household. The epicenter of their social world was the rental home situated at 1122 King Road. Located just south of the university campus, the three-story house was nestled into a hillside in a neighborhood densely populated by students. It was a bustling, chaotic, and joyful environment. With multiple roommates and a constant stream of visitors from various fraternities and sororities, the house on King Road was known as a gathering place. It was a space where doors were rarely locked, where friends walked in unannounced, and where the communal living spaces were filled with music, conversation, and the shared experiences of college life. The lives of Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee reflected the very best of what the University of Idaho had to offer. They were students fully engaged in the process of building their futures, surrounded by a community that fostered their growth. Their academic achievements, their leadership within the Greek system, and their profound loyalty to one another created a protective bubble of youth and optimism. They spent their days attending lectures, participating in chapter meetings, and planning for careers that spanned from marketing to sports management. Their nights were filled with the simple pleasures of college life, attending parties, watching movies, and staying up late to talk about their hopes for the future. In this remote corner of the Pacific Northwest, insulated by the rolling hills and the traditions of a historic university, these four young people were thriving. The town of Moscow provided a backdrop of absolute security, a place where the concept of extreme, targeted violence seemed entirely foreign. The community trusted in the safety of its streets and the sanctity of its student neighborhoods. The vibrant, intertwined lives of Ethan Chapin, Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, and Kaylee Gonkovs were a testament to the promise of this environment, laying the foundation for futures that would tragically never be realized. Just 8 miles away from the vibrant undergraduate community in Moscow, a vastly different collegiate experience was unfolding. In the summer of 2022, 28-year-old Bryan Kohberger arrived in Pullman, Washington, to begin a doctoral program in criminology and criminal justice at Washington State University. He had driven across the country from his home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, bringing with him an intense, highly clinical academic focus on the minds of offenders. His educational background was already steeped in the mechanics of illegal behavior. He had recently completed a Master of Arts in Criminal Justice at DeSales University in Pennsylvania, where he studied under renowned forensic psychologists and focused heavily on cloud-based forensics and the psychology of serial offenders. During his time at DeSales, his academic curiosity pushed him to seek direct communication with individuals who had committed crimes. As part of a research project, he posted a detailed survey on various social media platforms, including Reddit forums dedicated to the discussion of prison and criminal behavior. The survey was designed to understand how emotions and psychological traits influence decision-making during the commission of a crime. He asked respondents highly specific questions regarding their operational methodology. He wanted to know how they chose their targets, how they approached their victims, what steps they took to avoid detection, and what they were thinking and feeling in the moments before, during, and after the offense. This academic pursuit required an analytical detachment, dissecting the raw elements of violent and nonviolent criminal acts into individual data points for psychological evaluation. Upon arriving in the Pacific Northwest, Kohberger settled into an apartment complex in Pullman. Washington State University and the University of Idaho are separated by a short, 15-minute drive along State Route 270, a rural highway that cuts through the rolling agricultural hills of the Palouse. Despite the proximity of the two towns, they maintain distinctly separate campus cultures. While the undergraduate victims in Moscow were immersed in Greek life and campus social events, Kohberger was entering the rigorous, isolated world of a doctoral candidate. His program required him to serve as a teaching assistant, a role in which he led undergraduate discussion groups and graded papers. Students in his classes noted that he was a strict, meticulous grader early in the semester, maintaining a rigid and highly professional demeanor that left little room for personal connection. However, his life outside the university classroom began to trace a concerning geographic pattern. Soon after moving to Pullman in the late summer, Kohberger began making frequent, nocturnal drives across the state border into Moscow. He drove a 2015 white Hyundai Elantra, a vehicle he had originally registered in Pennsylvania before updating his registration and license plates to Washington State as the fall semester progressed. Cellular data later recovered by digital forensic investigators provided a highly detailed map of his movements during this period. When a mobile phone is powered on, it routinely communicates with nearby cellular towers to maintain network connectivity. These interactions create a digital footprint that can identify the general location of a device at a given time. Cellular triangulation relies on signal strength and the specific directional sectors of a cell tower to estimate a device's location. While it does not provide an exact pinpoint coordinate, it establishes a definitive area of presence. Historical cell phone records revealed a persistent pattern of travel from his apartment in Pullman to the specific residential neighborhood in Moscow where the victims resided. Between August and early November of 2022, the mobile device associated with Kohberger registered in the cellular coverage area, encompassing the King Road residence on at least 12 separate occasions. The timing of these visits was highly consistent and irregular for a student with no known personal ties to the area. Nearly all of the 12 recorded instances occurred late at night or in the very early hours of the morning, long after typical campus activities had ceased. These excursions were entirely separate from his academic responsibilities at Washington State University and indicated a focused, repeated interest in the topography of the Moscow neighborhood. A concrete physical data point corroborated this digital timeline in late August. On the evening of the 21st of August 2022, cellular records showed Kohberger's phone utilizing resources near the King Road house between 10:34 p.m. and 11:35 p.m. Shortly after leaving the vicinity of the victim's neighborhood, he was subjected to a traffic stop by a Latah County Sheriff's deputy. At 11:37 p.m., the deputy pulled over the white Hyundai Elantra at a Moscow intersection for a minor traffic infraction, specifically failing to wear a seatbelt. During the routine interaction, Kohberger provided his driver's license and his cellular phone number to the deputy. The resulting traffic citation placed him physically in Moscow, confirmed he was driving the white Elantra, and explicitly linked his identity to the specific phone number that was repeatedly registering near the victim's home. The structure and location of the residence at 1122 King Road made it particularly vulnerable to outside observation. The house was situated at the end of a dead-end street, built directly into the side of a sloping hill. Because of the uneven terrain, the front entrance opened into the first floor, while a sliding glass door in the back of the house provided ground-level access to the second floor. The third floor featured a small balcony overlooking the property. The residence was surrounded by a mix of other off-campus rentals, overgrown vegetation, and a heavily wooded area immediately behind the house. Large windows on every level offered an unobstructed view into the home, especially at night when the interior lights were illuminated against the stark darkness of the surrounding trees. The residence was known in the local student community as an active social hub. With multiple roommates and a steady stream of friends, boyfriends, and classmates coming and going, the house was rarely quiet. Yet, the physical layout allowed an observer positioned in the surrounding neighborhood or within the dark tree line behind the property to monitor the activities inside with relative ease. The repeated nocturnal visits recorded by cellular data suggest a sustained period of surveillance, operating in the quiet periphery of the victims' bustling college lives. The environment provided multiple vantage points from which to observe the routines, the entryways, and the vulnerabilities of the structure. As the leaves turned color and the fall semester deepened into October and November, Kohberger's dual existence continued. By day, he sat in university lecture halls, dissecting the theoretical foundations of deviant behavior, criminal psychology, and the justice system. He engaged in high-level academic discussions regarding the ways investigators track offenders, the processing of crime scenes, and the psychological profiles of violent criminals. By night, he navigated his white Hyundai Elantra down the darkened stretch of highway connecting Pullman to Moscow. He traced the familiar route to the dead-end street on King Road, his presence recorded silently by the network of cellular towers overhead. During this time frame, There was no documented prior relationship between the doctoral student from Washington State University and the undergraduate students at the University of Idaho. They did not share classes, they did not move in the same social circles, and their daily routines were separated by state lines and vastly different stages of life. The connection between them existed only in the deliberate unilateral movements of a vehicle crossing the border under the cover of darkness. The frequency of these trips established a silent, physical escalation. The geographical mapping, the intense psychological interest in the criminal mind, and the physical proximity to the King Road residence were steadily converging. Each late-night drive familiarized him with the terrain, establishing a pattern of access and retreat in the weeks before the academic theories he studied would transition into physical execution. The architecture of the residence at 1122 King Road played a defining role in the sequence of events that unfolded during the early morning hours of November 13. Built into a hillside, the structure featured 3 distinct levels, creating a complex internal geography that dictated how sound traveled and how an intruder could navigate the space. The lowest floor was accessible only from the front driveway, physically isolated from the upper 2 stories by an internal staircase. The second floor served as the primary communal space, containing the living room, the kitchen, and a sliding glass door that opened directly onto a back patio at ground level due to the sloping terrain. The third floor, accessible only via a narrow wooden staircase from the second-floor living room, contained 2 bedrooms. This staggered layout meant that entry through the second-floor sliding door provided immediate access to the core of the house, bypassing the ground floor entirely. Between 1:45 and 1:56 inches the morning, the 6 occupants of the house returned from various locations and settled into their respective floors. On the ground level, Bethany Funke retired to her bedroom. On the second floor, Dylan Mortensen occupied the southeast bedroom, while Xana Kernodle occupied the west bedroom. Kernodle was accompanied by her boyfriend, Ethan Chapin, who was spending the night. On the third floor, Madison Mogan and Kaylee Goncalves occupied the 2 upper bedrooms. Goncalves had brought her dog, a golden doodle named Murphy, who was kept in her separate bedroom for the night, while the 2 women shared Mogan's single bed. Activity within the house persisted well into the pre-dawn hours, creating a timeline of waking moments that overlapped precisely with the approach of the intruder. Forensic downloads of cellular devices indicated that Goncalves and Mogan made multiple outgoing phone calls between 2:26 and 2:50, 2 inches the morning. These calls, directed to a former boyfriend of Goncalves, went unanswered. Following these attempts, cellular activity on the third floor ceased, indicating the 2 women had fallen asleep. On the second floor, Kernodle remained awake. Digital records confirmed she was active on the TikTok application at 4:12 inches the morning. Earlier, at approximately 4:0 inches the morning, she received a food delivery from the DoorDash service. The delivery driver approached the house, left the food, and departed the area, marking the final documented interaction between the occupants of 1122 King Road and the outside world. At 4:04 inches the morning, surveillance cameras in the immediate vicinity captured a white sedan entering the King Road neighborhood for the 4th and final time. The vehicle engaged in a 3-point turn and parked near the residence. The physical breach of the home occurred shortly after this maneuver. Investigators concluded the point of entry was the sliding glass door on the second floor. The lock on this sliding door was known to be faulty, requiring only minimal effort to bypass. The intruder entered the communal space armed with a fixed-blade Ka-Bar knife. There was no forced entry, no shattered glass, and no immediate disturbance that alarmed the occupants. The layout placed the intruder in the center of the second floor, presenting direct access to the bedrooms of Mortensen and Kernodle and the staircase leading to the third floor. The intruder bypassed the second-floor bedrooms and ascended the narrow wooden staircase to the upper level. Physical evidence dictated that the initial attacks occurred in Mogan's bedroom. Both Mogan and Goncalves were asleep in the same bed. The assault was swift, localized entirely to the mattress, and executed in near-total darkness. The absence of defensive wounds on Mogan indicated she was attacked first while completely unconscious. Goncalves sustained varying wounds, but the severe and rapid nature of the assault prevented any substantial struggle or the generation of noise capable of alerting the lower floors to an immediate threat. The fatal injuries were inflicted with clinical force, causing rapid incapacitation. During this focused violence, a singular piece of physical evidence was separated from the attacker. A tan leather knife sheath, stamped with the United States Marine Corps Eagle, Globe, and Anchor insignia, was deposited on the bed next to Mogan's right side. The dog, Murphy, remained in the adjacent third-floor bedroom, separated from the violence by a closed door and left unharmed. Following the attack on the third floor, the intruder descended the stairs back to the second floor. The timeline established by digital forensics and surviving witness statements places the subsequent events between 4:12 and 4:20 inches the morning. The intruder moved toward the west bedroom occupied by Kernodle and Chapin. Given Kernodle's verified digital activity at 4:12 and the recent food delivery, forensic analysts concluded she was awake or in the process of consuming the meal when the attacker entered her room. The dynamics of the assault in this space differed significantly from the third floor. Chapin was fatally stabbed, with injury patterns indicating rapid incapacitation within the confines of the bedroom. Kernodle, however, exhibited pronounced defensive wounds on her hands and fingers, documenting a desperate physical struggle against the blade. The sounds of this violence, though partially muffled by the interior walls, penetrated the second-floor layout. Dylan Mortensen, sleeping in the southeast bedroom on the same floor, was awakened by the auditory disturbances. Mortensen later provided investigators with a chronological account of her sensory observations during this critical window. Her first awakening was prompted by a sound she initially identified as Goncalves playing with her dog on the floor above. Shortly after this, she heard a voice, which she attributed to either Goncalves or Kernodle, state clearly that someone was in the house. Mortensen opened her bedroom door to investigate the noise. She looked into the central living area, observed nothing unusual in the dim lighting, and closed her door. The acoustic footprint of the residence continued to register the ongoing violence. An adjacent house possessed an external security camera capable of recording audio. At 4:17 inches the morning, this camera captured the distinct sound of a dog barking, followed by a dull thud and a vocalization described in forensic reports as a whimpering sound. Inside the King Road house, Mortensen opened her door a second time after hearing sounds consistent with crying emanating from Kernodle's west bedroom. During this second visual check, Mortensen heard a male voice say something to the effect of, "It is okay, I am going to help you." The origin of this statement remains fixed to the timeline of the fatal struggle in the west bedroom. Mortensen closed her door once again, remaining in her room as the attack concluded mere yards down the hallway. Moments later, Mortensen opened her door for a third and final time. It was during this instance that she made direct visual contact with the intruder. She observed an unfamiliar male figure, clad entirely in black clothing, including a mask that covered the lower portion of his face, leaving only his eyes and eyebrows visible. She noted the individual possessed physically imposing, bushy eyebrows and an athletic but not overly muscular build, estimating his height to be 5 feet 10 inches or taller. The figure did not verbally acknowledge Mortensen or move toward her room. Instead, he walked past her open door, traversing the short distance through the living room toward the kitchen and the sliding glass rear exit. Mortensen stood in a state of frozen shock as the armed individual passed within feet of her position. Once the figure exited through the sliding door into the exterior darkness, Mortensen retreated fully into her bedroom and locked the door. The exit of the intruder synchronized with external surveillance data collected from the surrounding streets. The individual departed the residence, leaving the sliding glass door unlatched, and returned to the waiting sedan. At 4:20 inches the morning, cameras captured the white Elantra departing the King Road neighborhood at a high rate of speed, traveling south on Walenta Drive. The entire sequence, from the final approach of the vehicle to its rapid departure, spanned an estimated 16 minutes. Within that narrow corridor of time, the intruder successfully navigated 2 distinct floors of the unfamiliar residence. executed 4 fatal attacks with a fixed-blade weapon, and exited the premises without triggering a broader emergency alarm or encountering significant resistance from the surviving occupants. In the immediate aftermath of the departure, 1122 King Road fell into a profound silence. The violence had been contained exclusively within the specific bedrooms on the 2nd and 3rd floors. Blood evidence remained largely confined to those immediate areas, preventing any visual indicators of the catastrophic events from bleeding into the communal spaces visible from the hallways. On the 1st floor, Bethany Funke remained undisturbed, her sleep uninterrupted by the calculated movements and violence unfolding directly above her. On the 2nd floor, Mortensen remained secured within her locked bedroom, processing the auditory and visual stimuli she had just experienced through the physiological lens of extreme shock, fear, and confusion. The dog, Murphy, periodically barked from the isolated 3rd-floor bedroom, serving as the only remaining acoustic disturbance in the otherwise quiet structure. The clinical execution of the attacks left no immediate catalyst for a police response. The bodies of Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, Xana Kernodle, and Ethan Chapin lay in their respective rooms, having sustained massive trauma incompatible with life. The biological evidence began to settle into the environment, including the latent cellular material transferred onto the button snap of the leather knife sheath resting on the 3rd-floor bed. The external world remained entirely unaware of the breach. The neighborhood of off-campus housing transitioned silently into the early dawn, while the structure at 1122 King Road stood motionless, holding the physical reality of the 16-minute intrusion behind its closed doors. It would be nearly 8 hours before the silence within the house was broken by the discovery of the victims, leaving the early morning timeline suspended in the forensic record as a precise, fatal intersection of routine student life and targeted, unilateral violence. Daylight broke over Moscow, Idaho, revealing a quiet Sunday morning in the college town. Inside the 3-story rental home on King Road, the surviving residents awoke entirely unaware of the violence that had concluded in the dark hours above them. The acoustic isolation of the lower level, combined with the compartmentalized, staggered layout of the hillside structure, had shielded the ground floor from the auditory markers of the attack. As the morning progressed toward noon, a growing sense of concern materialized. The survivors were unable to reach their roommates. Finding an individual on the 2nd floor seemingly unresponsive and a door locked, the situation was initially perceived as a medical emergency. Believing a roommate had passed out and was beyond waking, they sought assistance. Several friends in the immediate area were summoned to the residence to help assess the situation. The group gathered in the common areas, attempting to ascertain what was wrong, while the silence from the upper floors remained absolute. At 11:58 a.m., a call connected to the Latta County Dispatch Center. The caller reported an unconscious person at the King Road address. Because multiple people had gathered inside the home, the mobile phone was passed between several individuals as the dispatcher attempted to gather coherent information to coordinate a response. The initial coding of the call as an unconscious individual prompted standard medical emergency protocols. Moscow Police Department officers operating concurrently with emergency medical personnel navigated the steep incline of the neighborhood. They arrived at a scene that immediately betrayed the limitations of the initial dispatch code. First responders breached the threshold of the residence and were immediately confronted with a reality that dictated an abrupt shift from emergency medical intervention to active crime scene preservation. The responding officers encountered a catastrophic loss of life. Upon confirming the presence of 4 deceased individuals on the 2nd and 3rd floors, the primary objective shifted to securing the environment. Officers immediately ordered all non-essential personnel, including the surviving roommates and their visiting friends, to evacuate the premises. The officers retreated from the interior, established a command post in the front driveway, and initiated the critical logistical process of securing the perimeter. Yellow crime scene tape was unspooled, stringing across the front yard, wrapping around the trunks of surrounding trees, and extending up the steep hillside to block access from the rear parking area. An inner perimeter was established to protect the physical structure and the immediate exterior footprint, while an outer perimeter was designated to manage the rapidly forming crowd of neighboring students, onlookers, and arriving local media. A strict crime scene entry log was initiated at the front threshold to document the exact time every individual crossed into or out of the house, an absolute protocol required to track potential cross-contamination. The realization of the scale of the crime struck the local authorities with immense force. The city of Moscow, an insular and traditionally safe university town, had not recorded a homicide since 2015. The Moscow Police Department, while highly capable in managing the localized issues of a college demographic, was faced with an investigative burden of unprecedented magnitude. Chief James Fry and his command staff recognized the immediate necessity for operational escalation. Within hours of the initial discovery, the jurisdictional parameters were widened to integrate external resources. The Idaho State Police were formally requested, bringing specialized homicide detectives and fully equipped mobile crime scene processing units to Lata County. The integration of state-level resources provided the necessary manpower to maintain the massive perimeter and begin the systematic mapping of the exterior environment. Simultaneously, the administration at the University of Idaho was alerted to the unfolding situation just steps from their campus boundaries. Acting on the preliminary information of a violent crime, the university issued a vandal alert, instructing the student body to shelter in place. The digital notification triggered a wave of localized panic. Students barricaded their dormitories and off-campus apartments, frantically texting friends and family as fragmented information began to populate social media networks. 2 hours later, authorities concluded that the specific threat had passed, determining the incident was an isolated, targeted attack rather than an active shooter scenario. The shelter-in-place order was lifted, but the reversal of the alert only deepened the ambient anxiety within the community. The juxtaposition of a bright, sunlit Sunday afternoon with the deployment of heavy police assets and the removal of the deceased generated an atmosphere of profound communal shock. By Monday morning, the operational footprint of the investigation had expanded exponentially. The Federal Bureau of Investigation was formally brought into the task force. The integration of federal assets transformed the Moscow police station into a multi-agency command center. The FBI deployed personnel from their behavioral analysis unit to assist in developing a profile of the unknown subject, while the cellular analysis survey team was activated to begin mapping the complex web of local cellular tower pings. The investigative labor was immediately divided into distinct, concurrent streams. While forensic teams managed the physical interior of the King Road residence, detectives were deployed outward to conduct a massive neighborhood canvass. The immediate strategy for external evidence gathering focused on digital surveillance. Investigators systematically harvested video files from Ring doorbells, Nest cameras, commercial security systems, and municipal traffic cameras. The topography of the neighborhood presented distinct challenges. The King Road residents sat in a valley of sorts, surrounded by intersecting, winding streets with limited lighting and numerous blind spots. The canvass required a massive logistical effort, with plainclothes detectives and uniformed officers knocking on hundreds of doors along Walenta Drive, Linda Lane, Taylor Avenue, and Indian Hills Drive. They sought to secure local storage drives and cloud access permissions before the digital footage could be automatically overwritten by the hardware systems. Once the raw data was collected, analysts established a temporal grid. Based on the physiological evidence at the scene and the digital footprints of the victims, the critical overnight window was narrowed. Investigators isolated the hours between 3 a.m. and 5 a.m. on November 13 as the primary target for review. Teams of analysts sat in darkened rooms at the command center, viewing hours of mundane, static footage of empty streets, looking for any anomaly that broke the pattern of the quiet residential grid. Within this vast repository of digital evidence, a breakthrough emerged. Footage recovered from a residential camera captured a white sedan traveling westbound on Indian Hills Drive at 3:29 a.m. The vehicle navigated the neighborhood with a distinct hesitancy. The movements captured on video indicated a driver who was either unfamiliar with the dead-end streets or actively engaging in a process of surveillance. The vehicle did not simply pass through the area. It initiated a sequence of maneuvers that tied it directly to the immediate vicinity of the crime scene. Analysts meticulously mapped the trajectory of the sedan across multiple disparate camera feeds, stitching together a cohesive timeline of its movements. Following the initial sighting at 3:29 a.m., the vehicle was recorded making a pass by the King Road residence. The car departed the immediate visual range of the local cameras, only to return minutes later. At 3:38 a.m., the sedan was captured making a second pass. The behavior of the vehicle demonstrated a predatory pacing. It left the area again, returning for a third pass at 3:52 a.m. The footage showed the vehicle driving deliberately, utilizing the layout of the neighborhood to loop back toward the target location. At 4:04 a.m., the most critical sequence of vehicle movement was recorded. The sedan was captured driving eastbound on King Road. It stopped directly in front of the residence, reversed, and executed a multi-point turn in the intersection of Queen Road and King Road. The vehicle then proceeded back westbound, maneuvering closer to the physical property. This extended loitering within the direct visual footprint of the residence firmly established the vehicle as the primary investigative lead. Following this maneuver, the vehicle vanished from the local camera feeds for a period of 16 minutes. At 4:20 a.m., the digital silence was broken. A security camera situated on Walenta Drive captured the same white sedan departing the King Road neighborhood. The behavior of the vehicle had radically altered. The hesitance and slow pacing observed during the arrival phase were completely absent. The sedan was now recorded traveling away from the scene at a high rate of speed, accelerating significantly as it moved southbound out of the residential zone and toward the primary state highway leading out of Moscow. The discovery of the vehicle footage shifted the entire trajectory of the investigation. However, identifying a generic white sedan on low resolution, infrared nighttime security footage presented a massive forensic challenge. The raw video files were securely transmitted to the FBI's regional laboratory, where they were assigned to an expert forensic examiner with decades of specialized experience in analyzing commercial vehicle dimensions and light emission patterns. The examiner utilized advanced enhancement software to clarify the pixelated footage, measuring the exact curvature of the vehicle's roofline, the specific placement of the headlights, the shape of the fog light housing, and the dimensions of the C-pillar. Through this rigorous geometric analysis, the generic white sedan was distilled into a highly specific mechanical profile. The FBI examiner officially identified the suspect vehicle as a white Hyundai Elantra, manufactured between the model years of 2011 and 2013. This identification provided the task force with a concrete parameter. The investigation transitioned from searching for an unknown phantom to hunting for a specific machine. The multi-agency team initiated a secondary canvass, utilizing state and federal databases to cross-reference every registered white Hyundai Elantra within a set geographic radius of Lata County, cross-checking the vehicle registrations against university parking permits, local traffic citations, and border crossing data. As the database search commenced, the command staff made a strategic decision regarding the control of information. To protect the integrity of the investigation and prevent the unknown operator of the vehicle from destroying evidence or fleeing the jurisdiction, the discovery of the Hyundai Elantra was initially heavily compartmentalized. It was classified as holdback evidence, restricted entirely to the internal task force. While the community of Moscow demanded answers and the national media intensified their scrutiny of the local police department, investigators silently and methodically built a digital net, using the specific make and model of the fleeing vehicle as the anchor point for a rapidly expanding hunt. While analysts sifted through thousands of vehicle records and jurisdictional databases, crime scene technicians in Moscow, Idaho, focused entirely on a single piece of physical evidence left behind in the third-floor bedroom of the King Road residence. Positioned partially under the body of Madison Mogan was a tan leather knife sheath, manufactured for a USMC K-bar fighting knife. The sheath featured a heavy-duty metallic button snap. Recognizing the high probability of transfer DNA resulting from the tactile friction required to unfasten the clasp, forensic specialists handled the item with extreme precision to avoid contamination. The sheath was transported to the Idaho State Police Forensic Laboratory, where scientists swabbed the metallic snap. Their meticulous efforts yielded a microscopic amount of biological material. From this cellular debris, the laboratory successfully extracted a single-source male DNA profile. Investigators immediately uploaded the genetic sequence into the Combined DNA Index System, the national database containing profiles of convicted offenders, arrestees, and unidentified forensic samples. The search returned no matches. The unknown suspect had no prior felony convictions that would have required him to submit a DNA sample to law enforcement. Facing a critical juncture in the investigation, the command staff authorized the use of investigative genetic genealogy. This advanced forensic technique bridges the gap between traditional criminal databases and consumer-based genealogical research. The DNA profile from the knife sheath was securely transferred to specialized analysts who processed the genetic data to identify single nucleotide polymorphisms, the variations in a DNA sequence that can determine familial relationships. This comprehensive genetic profile was then uploaded into public genealogical databases, platforms where individuals voluntarily share their genetic information to find distant relatives. By identifying individuals who shared specific segments of DNA with the unknown suspect, genealogists began the arduous process of reverse engineering a family tree. They worked backward from distant cousins, tracing lineage through census records, birth certificates, obituaries, and social media networks. The genealogical mapping steadily narrowed the scope from sprawling ancestral lines down to a specific geographical region and, eventually, to a single family unit rooted in Pennsylvania. At this precise moment in the investigation, the forensic intelligence converged with the ongoing analytical tracking of the suspect vehicle. Law enforcement cross-referenced the surname generated by the genetic genealogy team with records from the region surrounding Moscow, Idaho. The inquiry immediately highlighted a 28-year-old doctoral student in the criminology department at Washington State University, situated just 8 miles across the state border in Pullman, Washington. The student's name was Bryan Kohberger. A review of Kohberger's records revealed a cascading series of circumstantial connections. He was the registered owner of a white 2015 Hyundai Elantra. 5 days after the homicides, Kohberger had changed the vehicle's registration from Pennsylvania to Washington State, receiving new license plates. Investigators subsequently secured search warrants for cellular data associated with his phone number. The historical cell site location information demonstrated a pattern of movement that aligned with the geography of the crime. The data indicated that Kohberger's phone had utilized cellular resources, providing coverage to the area of the King Road residence on at least 12 separate occasions prior to November 13, predominantly during the late evening and early morning hours. On the morning of the homicides, the device had disconnected from the network, a behavior consistent with being powered off or placed in airplane mode, before reconnecting hours later south of Moscow. By mid-December, the academic semester at Washington State University concluded. Kohberger and his father departed Pullman in the white Hyundai Elantra, embarking on a cross-country drive back to the family residence in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, for the holiday break. Federal and state law enforcement agencies meticulously tracked their progression eastward. Along the route, the vehicle was subjected to 2 separate traffic stops in quick succession by local police and state troopers in Indiana, ostensibly for following another vehicle too closely. These stops were closely monitored by the Central Command Center, providing visual confirmation of the vehicle's occupants and their demeanor, without alerting Kohberger to the fact that he was the primary suspect in a quadruple homicide investigation. Body camera footage captured Kohberger in the driver's seat, exhibiting a calm and conversational tone, while his father spoke about their long journey from the Pacific Northwest. Following the traffic stops, the Elantra continued its journey, eventually arriving at the Kohberger family home, situated within the Indian Mountain Lake-gated community in the Pocono Mountains of Pennsylvania. The environment was rural, heavily wooded, and blanketed in winter snow. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit and elite surveillance teams established a covert perimeter around the residence. Operating around the clock in freezing temperatures, federal agents documented the suspect's movements and routines. The surveillance logs noted highly irregular behavior. Kohberger was observed remaining awake late into the night. Agents documented him meticulously cleaning the interior and exterior of the white Hyundai Elantra, utilizing surgical gloves during the process. He was seen thoroughly wiping down the steering wheel, dashboard, and door handles, actions consistent with an individual attempting to destroy or obscure trace forensic evidence. Furthermore, surveillance teams observed Kohberger collecting his personal refuse, placing it into separate plastic bags, and depositing those bags into the garbage bins of neighboring properties during the early hours of the morning. To secure an arrest warrant, investigators needed a definitive forensic link connecting the individual under surveillance in Pennsylvania directly to the DNA found on the knife sheath in Idaho. The deliberate disposal of trash in neighboring bins provided law enforcement with a legal avenue to acquire discarded biological material without the need for a search warrant. Under the cover of darkness, tactical teams executed a covert trash pull. Agents approached the curbside bins, quietly extracted the specific bags deposited by Kohberger, and immediately transported the material to a secure staging area. The contents of the garbage were carefully cataloged. Investigators isolated several discarded items containing biological material and expedited their transport to the Pennsylvania State Police Laboratory for emergency processing. Forensic scientists isolated a DNA profile from the household waste and performed a direct comparative analysis against the single-source male profile recovered from the button snap of the K-bar knife sheath. The laboratory results were conclusive, though indirect. The DNA extracted from the Pennsylvania trash pull belonged to a male individual. When compared to the forensic profile from the Idaho crime scene, the analysis confirmed a direct familial relationship. The data established that the individual whose DNA was found in the trash was the biological father of the individual who left DNA on the knife sheath. The statistical probability was overwhelming. It confirmed that Bryan Kohberger, the son residing at the address where the trash was collected, was the source of the biological material left beneath the body of Madison Mogen. Armed with the genetic genealogy tracing, the vehicle identification, the historical cell site location data, the suspicious behavioral observations, and the definitive familial DNA match, investigators finalized a comprehensive 19-page probable cause affidavit. A magistrate judge in Lata County, Idaho, reviewed the documentation and issued an arrest warrant for Bryan Kohberger on 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The apprehension phase required meticulous tactical planning due to the severity of the crimes and the potential threat posed by the suspect. The operation was assigned to the Pennsylvania State Police Special Emergency Response Team. Briefings detailed the layout of the Albrightsville residence, the exact location of the target's bedroom, and the positioning of other family members in the home. On the early morning of the 30th of December 2022, under the cover of darkness, multiple armored vehicles and tactical units converged on the Indian Mountain Lake community. The perimeter was secured to prevent any possibility of escape. At approximately 1:15 a.m., the tactical team initiated a dynamic entry. Flashbang devices were deployed to disorient the occupants, illuminating the snow-covered yard with blinding flashes of light. Simultaneous breaches were executed at multiple entry points. Windows were systematically shattered as heavily armed operators flooded the interior of the home. Commands echoed through the hallways as tactical officers systematically cleared each room. Bryan Kohberger was located on the premises and taken into custody without incident. He offered no physical resistance as he was placed in handcuffs and escorted out into the freezing night. He was wearing shorts and a shirt, exhibiting a flat, stoic demeanor as he was placed into the back of an armored transport vehicle. Simultaneously, specialized evidence recovery teams initiated the execution of search warrants on the residence and the vehicle. The white Hyundai Elantra, parked in the driveway, was immediately impounded, sealed in protective wrapping, and transported to a secure forensic garage for intensive processing. Inside the home, technicians methodically documented the scene, seizing electronic devices, computers, cellular phones, clothing, and other personal effects belonging to the suspect. Every item was bagged, tagged, and logged into the chain of custody. The arrest of Bryan Kohberger marked the culmination of a highly complex, multi-jurisdictional investigation that utilized traditional detective work alongside the most advanced genomic technology available to modern law enforcement. The seamless integration of physical evidence collection, digital tracking, and genetic mapping had successfully identified and localized a suspect who had actively attempted to evade detection across multiple state lines. Following his processing at a local holding facility, Kohberger was remanded to the Monroe County Correctional Facility, where he was held without bail, awaiting extradition proceedings that would transport him back to the state of Idaho to face the judicial system. Immediately following his arrest and the comprehensive processing of his Pennsylvania residence, the suspect faced the reality of his confinement at the Monroe County Correctional Facility. He was held without bail and isolated from the general population as immediate suicide watch protocols were implemented. Legal proceedings commenced swiftly. During a brief extradition hearing on the 3rd of January 2023, he formally waived his right to challenge his return to Idaho. His Pennsylvania public defender stated that the suspect was eager to be exonerated and viewed the waiver as the fastest path back to a jurisdiction where he could confront the charges head-on. The logistics of transporting a high-profile quadruple murder suspect across the country required intense coordination between state and federal authorities. On January 4, heavily armed tactical officers escorted the defendant from the Pennsylvania jail to a waiting Pennsylvania State Police Pilatus PC-12 aircraft. The flight path was tracked by thousands of civilians online as the small plane made scheduled refueling stops before ultimately descending toward the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport. Upon landing, a convoy of unmarked vehicles and armored personnel carriers immediately surrounded the aircraft on the tarmac. Authorities transferred the shackled defendant into a secure transport van, driving him directly to the Lata County Jail in Moscow. The entire operation was conducted under extreme security protocols to prevent any interference, media ambushes, or threats to the suspect. In Idaho, the judicial machinery engaged immediately. The defendant made his initial appearance before a local magistrate, where the 4 first-degree murder charges and the single felony burglary charge were officially read into the record. The presiding judge swiftly issued a strict non-dissemination order, widely known as a gag order, which legally prohibited law enforcement, prosecuting attorneys, defense counsel, and representatives of the victims' families from discussing the particulars of the case with the media or the public. This legal maneuver was designed to preserve the integrity of the impending trial and prevent the jury pool from being irrevocably tainted by the massive wave of international pre-trial publicity. Over the subsequent 2 years, the legal battle was defined by a relentless series of pre-trial motions. The prosecution formally filed its notice of intent to seek the death penalty, arguing that the murders were especially heinous, atrocious, and manifested exceptional depravity. In response, the defense team launched a comprehensive assault on the state's evidence. They filed multiple motions to dismiss the grand jury indictment, citing procedural irregularities and questioning the standard of proof used to secure the charges. The defense also relentlessly pursued the records concerning the investigative genetic genealogy used by the FBI to initially identify the suspect. They argued that the methodology was a violation of his Fourth Amendment rights and demanded full transparency regarding the civilian genealogical databases accessed by federal agents during the manhunt. The defense strategy included filing a formal notice of alibi. The legal documents claimed that the defendant was driving his vehicle late at night alone, asserting that he had a long-standing habit of going for nocturnal drives to observe the night sky. The prosecution dismantled this assertion in their responses, noting that the alleged stargazing was completely uncorroborated by any independent witnesses, electronic communications, or location data that would place him away from the King Road residence at the exact time of the murders. Recognizing the impossibility of finding an impartial jury in the small, deeply affected community of Moscow, the defense subsequently filed a motion for a change of venue. After reviewing statistical data demonstrating pervasive local bias and considering the immense logistical strain on Lata County, the Idaho Supreme Court approved the transfer. The trial was relocated to the Ada County Courthouse in Boise, moving the proceedings to a larger metropolitan area capable of handling the immense security footprint. As the summer 2025 trial date approached, the sheer volume of discovery material reached unprecedented levels. The prosecution had assembled terabytes of digital evidence, including the intricate cellular triangulation maps, extensive video canvassing showing the precise movements of the white Hyundai Elantra, and the incontrovertible DNA analysis matching the defendant to the Ka-bar knife sheath left on the bed next to Madison Mogen. Faced with a meticulously sequenced presentation of his movements and the looming, very real threat of the execution chamber, the defense recognized the insurmountable hurdles of a capital trial. Behind closed doors, delicate legal negotiations commenced. The prosecution consulted extensively with the families of Ethan Chapin, Zana Kernodle, Madison Mogen, and Kaylee Goncalves. While some family members desired the ultimate punishment, the collective realization of what a death penalty trial actually entailed shifted the consensus. A capital trial would require the families to endure months of graphic forensic testimony, autopsy photographs, and the agonizing process of reliving the worst night of their lives in a public forum. Furthermore, a death sentence would guarantee decades of mandatory taxpayer-funded appeals, continuously dragging the families back into courtrooms for the rest of their lives. To ensure absolute finality and spare the victims' loved ones from further judicial trauma, a plea agreement was struck. In July 2025, the legal trajectory of the case shifted permanently. The defendant entered the Ada County courtroom not to commence jury selection, but to change his plea. Security inside the building was absolute. The gallery was filled with the victims' families, law enforcement personnel who had worked the case for years, and a limited pool of credentialed reporters. The presiding judge meticulously questioned the defendant to ensure he was legally competent, understood the constitutional rights he was waiving, and was entering the agreement voluntarily. When asked how he pleaded to the 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary, the defendant, in a flat, emotionless tone, responded guilty to each and every charge. The prosecution then read a comprehensive summary of the facts into the official judicial record, publicly detailing the timeline, the digital footprint, and the forensic evidence that proved his culpability. By entering the guilty pleas, the defendant successfully removed the death penalty from consideration, accepting a guaranteed outcome of life imprisonment. The formal sentencing hearing was scheduled shortly thereafter, serving as the final, profoundly emotional climax of the legal proceedings. The courtroom environment was heavy, charged with years of accumulated grief and unanswered questions regarding the motive behind the unprovoked slaughter. The judge allocated extensive time for victim impact statements, providing the families their first and only opportunity to address the man who had decimated their lives. One by one, the parents, siblings, and close relatives of the 4 victims approached the podium. They painted vivid portraits of the bright futures that had been stolen. They spoke of empty chairs at graduation ceremonies, future weddings that would never be celebrated, and the severe generational trauma inflicted upon their families. They detailed the agonizing, haunting reality of knowing their children's final moments were filled with absolute terror. As the families delivered their statements, they directed their words specifically at the defendant seated just feet away at the defense table. The testimonies were raw, unfiltered, and deeply visceral. Multiple family members explicitly called him evil, stripping away any legal or psychological jargon to describe the sheer malice of his actions. They categorized him as a coward who preyed upon sleeping young adults in the sanctity of their own home. They questioned the profound void inside a human being that would drive them to commit such an atrocity, noting that while his academic pursuits involved studying the criminal mind, his physical actions reduced him to nothing more than a common murderer. They emphasized with absolute certainty that his name would eventually fade into obscurity within the confines of a prison cell, while the memories of Ethan, Xana, Madison, and Kaylee would endure permanently in the hearts of those who loved them. Throughout the agonizing duration of these victim impact statements, the defendant's demeanor remained intensely clinical and detached. He sat rigidly in his chair, his hands folded on the table, his eyes fixed straight forward on the judge's bench. He made no eye contact with the grieving mothers and fathers standing at the podium weeping. There were no tears, no defensive shifts in posture, and no visible emotional reactions to the devastating words being spoken against him. When the judge formally offered the defendant the opportunity to address the court, the victims' families, or to offer any semblance of an apology or explanation for his actions, he exercised his right to allocution by choosing to remain completely silent. He offered no justification, no remorse, and no closure regarding his motive, taking the specific reasons for his violent rampage into permanent silence. Following the conclusion of the statements, the presiding judge delivered the final remarks before pronouncing the sentence. The judge condemned the crimes as a senseless, calculated, and exceptionally brutal intrusion into the lives of 4 innocent young adults who had everything to live for. The court emphasized that the defendant's actions required the absolute maximum penalty available under the terms of the plea agreement to ensure the permanent safety of society. The judge formally sentenced him to 4 consecutive terms of life in prison without the possibility of parole, mandating that the sentences for each victim would be served back-to-back rather than concurrently. An additional consecutive sentence was handed down for the felony burglary charge. The utilization of consecutive sentences was a deliberate judicial decision designed to honor the distinct individual value of each life violently taken from the world. As the final sentence was logged into the official record, the gavel struck, concluding the sprawling legal saga that had consumed the state of Idaho and the nation for nearly 3 years. Heavily armed bailiffs immediately approached the defense table, instructing the condemned man to stand. He was placed in handcuffs, his ankles shackled, and escorted out of the courtroom through a secure side exit. He was subsequently transferred into the custody of the Idaho Department of Correction, remanded to a maximum security facility, where he would be assigned a permanent inmate number and placed in solitary confinement for his own protection. The legal outcome provided a definitive, irreversible conclusion. The intricate legal maneuvering, the complex forensic debates, and the intense public scrutiny ended in a stark clinical reality. The perpetrator was condemned to live out the remainder of his natural life behind the concrete walls of a state penitentiary, effectively erased from society, leaving the families of the victims to navigate the lifelong process of grieving their incalculable loss. As the heavy courtroom doors sealed shut behind the convoy transporting the condemned man to a lifetime of confinement, the legal machinery of the state ground to a halt. For the justice system, the final gavel drop marked the resolution of a highly publicized docket number. For the city of Moscow, the University of Idaho, and the surviving families, it signaled the beginning of an arduous, permanent reality. The intense spotlight of national media began to fade, leaving a quiet, rural college town to reckon with a changed identity. Moscow had long been characterized by its rolling agricultural hills and the youthful energy of its student population. Now, it was forced to integrate an unprecedented tragedy into its historical fabric, balancing the necessity of moving forward with the moral imperative to remember. The most immediate physical reminder of the devastation stood on a dead-end street just off campus. The 3-story off-campus rental home at 1122 King Road had become an ominous landmark. For months, it sat boarded up, surrounded by chain-link fencing and monitored by 2 4-hour security personnel. It was a grim monument to the violence that occurred within its walls, drawing unwanted attention and serving as a daily visual trigger for the community. The university, having acquired the property, faced a complex decision regarding its fate. While some debated the forensic value of preserving the structure, university officials argued its continued existence served only to traumatize the neighborhood and attract morbid spectators. Ultimately, the decision was made to erase the structure from the landscape. On a freezing, overcast morning in late December 2023, heavy demolition equipment arrived at the site. Excavators methodically tore into the gray wood siding, dismantling the bedrooms, the communal spaces, and the roof. Within hours, the house was reduced to a pile of splintered debris, which was promptly loaded into dump trucks and hauled away. The foundation was excavated, the ground graded, and grass seeds scattered over the bare earth. The empty lot offered a stark, quiet contrast to the imposing structure that had once loomed over the street. Removing the physical footprint of the crime scene was a clinical, necessary step in urban healing, though it was universally understood that the psychological scar on the town would remain permanent. To provide a constructive space for mourning and remembrance, the University of Idaho initiated the creation of the Vandal Healing Garden and Memorial. Situated on the university campus near McLean Field, the garden was conceived not merely as a monument to the 4 victims of the King Road tragedy, but as a sanctuary dedicated to all Vandal students who passed away during their enrollment. Students and faculty from the College of Art and Architecture collaborated extensively on the design, emphasizing natural elements meant to evoke peace and continuity. The physical layout incorporated sweeping, accessible pathways, native Idaho flora, and quiet seating areas constructed from natural stones sourced from the region. A central focal point of the garden was designed to catch the natural sunlight, offering students, faculty, and visiting families a secluded environment for reflection, away from the bustle of academic life. The university community poured resources and volunteer hours into the project, transforming a simple campus green space into a meticulously curated landscape of remembrance. It stood as a permanent, living counterpoint to the finality of the violence, ensuring that future generations of students would have a designated, safe place to process grief and find solace. Beyond physical memorials, the families and the institution sought to immortalize the victims through enduring educational endowments. The goal was to ensure their names would be forever associated with opportunity, academic achievement, and youth, rather than a brutal crime. Scholarships were established individually in the names of Xana Kernodle, Madison Mogan, Kaylee Goncalves, and Ethan Chapin. Each fund was carefully tailored to reflect their specific passions, Greek life involvement, and academic pursuits. The university community, local businesses, alumni, and donors from across the globe contributed millions of dollars to these financial endowments. These funds guaranteed that, in perpetuity, incoming freshmen and continuing students would receive financial assistance in the names of the 4 who were denied the chance to complete their own degrees. The families also channeled their profound grief into independent charitable foundations, expanding the legacy of the victims beyond the state lines of Idaho. Ethan Chapin's family launched a foundation rooted in his bright demeanor and his deep ties to his agricultural background in Washington state. Partnering with commercial bulb growers, the foundation facilitated the planting of a massive, vibrant tulip garden in the Skagit Valley. The specific variety of yellow and white flowers was sold nationwide to raise funds. This initiative provided critical financial support to students attending the University of Idaho, as well as high school graduates from Ethan's hometown, turning a localized devastation into a widespread mechanism for community uplift. Similarly, the families of Madison, Kaylee, and Xana directed resources into causes that mirrored the girls' vibrant lives, heavily supported by their respective sororities and the broader university Greek system. The enduring impact on the local community altered the fundamental atmosphere of Moscow. The naive, inherent security typical of isolated Pacific Northwest college towns was permanently fractured, replaced by a vigilant, protective awareness. The university implemented comprehensive security upgrades, increased campus police patrols, improved lighting, and expanded mental health resources for all students and faculty. The phrase, "Vandal Strong," transitioned from a temporary, grief-stricken rallying cry into a permanent community ethos. It was visible on storefront windows along Main Street, embedded in campus apparel, and displayed on local billboards. It represented a collective, stubborn refusal to let the town and the university be defined solely by an act of profound malice. As incoming classes arrived in subsequent years, they were inducted into a community that carried a heavy historical burden but demonstrated an extraordinary capacity for resilience. The legacy of the tragedy evolved into a complex tapestry of absence and constructive action. While the judicial system had processed the perpetrator, locking him away in sterile, anonymous silence, the victims' legacies expanded outward into the world. Through the quiet rustle of native plants in the Vandal Healing Garden, the blank, peaceful earth where the King Roadhouse once stood, and the annual awarding of scholarships to hopeful young adults, the community actively reclaimed its future. The historical narrative of Moscow ceased to be exclusively about the darkness of a single November night, evolving instead into a factual, enduring testament to how a community remembers its lost children, honors their unlived futures, and meticulously rebuilds its sense of home.